One of the big things that Reid and I like to look down and see if our toes are tapping on their own when someone's playing music for you. Is it actually enjoyable? Is it musical and is it interesting? Is it toe tapping? Or is it just a dirge? Is it dull and dreary? So for me, that's a very, very important intangible. I don't know how to spell it out because it's a gut feeling based on your experiences and what is music to you, and trying not to let your personal preferences override what might be attractive to someone else. But you are the judge, for right or for wrong. You are paid and asked to make a decision based on criteria which you've established over your years of experience. For me, it doesn't get any bigger in Ensemble than the enjoyment factor. So what makes it enjoyable? All these things, all these building blocks combined lead to something that's enjoyable. If we have time, we should talk about medley construction and what all is involved with that and what you should listen to. But generally, I think a band is making a big mistake if they go 100% with new so-called creative material and completely disregard some of the great tunes of time. I think it's a mistake. That's just a personal preference, because it's a little bit harder for your toe to get tapping. It takes a little more time. I like to hear a performance which combines both. A classic or two and some creative new stuff put together in a way which makes some sense from start to finish. Not a cut and paste, bridged appropriately, flowing appropriately, but I think a mix is a good strategy for a band. At the same time, when I'm judging, I try to coach myself to not be harsh on these bands that are ultra so-called creative. Just not my personal cup of tea. Or us in SFU, we try to combine the both. It's a hard one. It's a hard one because my toe is not naturally tapping with all this crazy stuff. Hyper-rhythmic, lacking in melodic type tunes. It must be a melody for me. So just so you know, if I'm ever judging you, please put something in that's nice, has a tune to it, you know. I really like to hear phrasing in a band. I think and talking about solo piping, it's just brutal if there's no phrasing. It's so unenjoyable, and the band's the same thing. For me, the Strasbass must be danceable and lively from all corners of the band. I like that. And it's hard to hear that in the lower grade bands. Translation, you got lots to write about. You're the judge. If you're looking for something to write about, boy, oh boy, you got it there. When they get to the Strasbass, it's harder playing technically, much harder playing musically. So I've never at a loss for something to say in a lower grade contest. That alone gives me material, let alone the tone and the bad attacks and everything else. There's usually not a lack of stuff to talk about.
Even if you go to like grade 5 in a march medley, or grade 4 when they're playing their quick march medley, if they're playing a march, it should at least be something that they're marching to. I have a real hard time appreciating a band who's playing something at a really, really slow tempo, because if they play it any faster, they wouldn't be able to get all the work in. Well, obviously that's where the downfall is, that they picked the wrong tune, period. But you know, if it's a march, then they should be marching to it, you know. And there's a fairly generous beat per minute count that you could march to, you know. You know, you'd probably go 70, 72 being at the lower end, all the way up to like an 84 or an 86 being at the other end. So there's quite a generous spread there. But sometimes you'll hear bands coming out and they're playing so slow that it's not really a march. That's not marching. You know, like it's called a march because people march when they play it. So if it has to be slowed down to the point where it's not marchable, then they shouldn't do it. And again, it happens a lot in bands who are trying to tackle pieces that are just a little bit over their head, and they think, well, we'll slow it down a little bit. And then, of course, that's when you get real problems too, because the drummers don't want it to be slowed down, because you know their score was, well, I thought, well, we'd be playing this about 78 beats per minute, and the pipers are at 70. That's a huge contrast and what they're trying to do, and that would roll into other tunes. One thing that I do like, kind of, I guess it's just something that we do in SFU a lot, is if you're going to be creative, rather than try and find the latest 4 parts of round hornpipe and reel that's just been created by the newest composer on the block, I like to see what we can do with older tunes, you know? And if there's a lot of melody in a tune, there's probably a lot of melody in that tune if it's written in a different time signature, you know? Like I've heard Alistair at many recitals play his Caberface set that goes on for sometimes a good 10 minutes, depending on how creative he gets at the end. But there's so much melody and music in the tune that started that you never really think that you're actually listening to the same tune because it's just so good. And there's lots of unbelievable little tunes out there that you can do that. Our band has had a lot of fun doing a lot of things with the keel roll, where we've probably played it in every time signature available to man, and it's always been very well received. So I think that when I hear a band that's done that, it's like, you know, when you expect, if it was a tune like and then all of a sudden it's like, I know that tune, but because it's in a different time signature, it slightly trips you up, and it's like, man, that's great. I like that. That's the kind of thing that really turns my crank. And when I'm looking for ideas for the band, I'm always wondering how something else might go in a different time signature so that it can perhaps lease a new life on an old tune that might have been, you know, buried away for a few years, you know. We've done that personally with a few tunes, and, you know, some of these tunes are great. They're still being played because they're great tunes, you know. Like, how many bad tunes are in the C4th book? You know, not many at all. I mean, it's loaded with these little 2-parted gems, you know. So I always find it kind of bizarre how, like, if a band goes out and plays a complete medley of tunes that I don't know, it's like, it's hard. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but if you're trying, from a competitive standpoint, if you're trying to compete successfully, at least I'm hoping that the competitor is going to give me something that I can hang my hat on. But if you can't hang your hat on anything, it's a toughie, you know. It's a real toughie.
As judges, I think we need to be flexible. Okay, there's been a real change in the type of music we're hearing. Flashing back in time, it was very Scottish and very pointed. Then it became very Scottish and not that pointed. Then it became quite Irish and not that pointed. Now it's becoming quite not British and not that pointed. I mean, are we entrenched in our preferences, or are we at least open to what's happening? An example that's on my mind right now, Shot's one at the Worlds, as you know. There is a little section in their medley, deep in the medley, I don't know, around the 6-minute mark, which can be best described as Native American. I mean, I mean that in a nice way. I don't mean that negatively. I said to Terry, wow, what a mind that guy's got. It's brilliant. Now, it's not something we would have come up with. It's not my preference. I don't prefer it. But when they did it, I don't know how else to describe this. The type of is just incredible. To me, the creativity of that was way beyond the norm. Brilliant. Whoever can remember that, probably Rob Matheson. Fantastic. So just as adjudicators, I would encourage you to not hammer and slam stuff that doesn't fit in your preferences. As I said, it's not in my preferences, but I loved it. And the way they did it was exquisite.
What I find difficult is when you're listening to a medley is, what is it? Is it a hornpipe or is it a reel? Reels have become more hornpipey, and hornpipes have become more reel-like. And then you've got an interpretation. The pipers think is when they say, oh, well, we're playing a reel. Well, we're just playing it a little funkier than a regular reel. So you're listening to it almost as a hornpipe. But the drummers think it's a reel, and they're playing it differently, like a reel.
Yeah.
And it really gives you quite a dissonant sound.
I think you're going to hear more of that as time goes on. I mean, Gone seem to be the days of entering a medley with a pointed piece of music, because that pointed piece of music always seems to take a minute or a minute and a half. It's a long time. And there's a certain energy in round played reel/hornpipes. And then, as we talked about earlier, the end of medleys are almost always round. So I think we just need to be flexible to that. Our job is to not criticize that, is to evaluate the quality of that, but not disregarding our interpretation of what is good music.
Now, one of the things that I find, especially in lower grade bands, is the fact that they'll come out and play a strathspey, and then they'll play a reel, and the tempo relationship will just be completely wrong in the medley. That they have one tune that just doesn't fit in the tempo structure of everything else they did. Or maybe they'll start off and they'll play a march at a good tempo, and they'll follow it with a jig, and it'll be just dead slow. And then there's strathspey and reel later in the medley will be fine, up to tempo and so on. And this sort of lack of balance in tempo really is a problem in lower grade bands. That
Most definitely. Often I think the lower grade bands, as we said earlier, play stuff which is way too complicated and they can't get the tempo up. I think they're much wiser to play simpler stuff at an appropriate, lively tempo, take out doublings if necessary. All the bands do it. We get over it, you know, and play stuff that makes musical sense within their capability. Play it well, and they're going to do, I think, better in front of all of us judges than if they bite off these difficult tunes.
But then not take out too much of the great notes and doublings, because some of those grade 5 bands, grade 4 bands that go completely the other way, and now you've got this really bland sound lacking execution.
I think that's a valid point too. I would also argue that, I agree with that, say that, but I also feel that almost every band that puts all the beef in, I can't actually hear it. The quality of the clarity of the technique is just not there for me to be able to really hear a doubling, so why is it even there? I can't hear it. It's too tight, it's not together, etc. It depends what level of detail you're going to. In the higher grades, if I'm doing piping, I really expect to hear the detail well played. They have to have given attention to the embellishments. But in a lower grade, I'm much more forgiving of that. If they can play the other things well, that's a detail to be ranked in my brain when I'm evaluating the performance.
I think more than anything as well, Ken, that the ensemble judge maybe has a little more license to say that as a package of tunes, this was very nice or not very nice. I think that maybe the responsibility can fall on the ensemble judge to do that, or the presentation of how the tunes were, you know, drums playing with pipes. I think the ensemble judge should feel confident in saying that, you know.
Medley construction used to always fall into two main camps. I don't know where it is anymore. It's getting more creative, but often you would hear an opening tune, something a band could march to. Could be a march, or it could be a reel, or it could be a hornpipe, or something that they can move their feet to, into strathspeys of some kind, reels of some kind, slow air, a slow moment of some kind, waltz, slow air, something, and an ender. And the ending piece would often be in the jig camp. And the other style that you often hear would be the opening tune to march in with, right into jigs, then into your slow air, a strathspey, and the ender in this case would usually be reels, but not always. So those are the two main categories of medley construction that you still hear. Just that the whole thing is getting blurred. As I described that shots medley, for example, and I truly loved it, actually. I really did. I love the thinking that went into it. I don't know where that fell on the whole spectrum, but over the course of their performance, they had some strathspey, some very nice strathspey stuff. They went in with confidence. They had the slow moment, showing off the tone, some nice stuff going on. They had this really, you know, active stuff towards the end. I'm just saying that they covered all the food groups there, you know. The variety was there, and they chose to put it together in a way which was very creative, and the integration was gorgeous. So I just propose to you as fellow judges that you want to make sure that you are hearing variety. If you're hearing a performance that does not have a slow moment, then to me that's a critical thing. There's just a big lack of variety there. If you're hearing something without stress bass, for me that band is never making the prize list. You just have to have it. It's such a big part of pipe band music, in my opinion. I can get away with, you know, no jigs, maybe, or some pointed reels, not pointed, you know, round, whatever. But I think there's some cornerstones that you need to hear. That's just my opinion. But above all, it has to be variety. Any disagreements or agreements on that one? Anybody? John?
You had mentioned previously that, well, I don't know if I'm saying anything people don't know, but there's tendency towards going in round and the last half the medleys round. I mean, it's basically the same feel and the same thinking. Bookending the medleys. I mean, there's that is going on, and that's also in the prize list.
We thought we were being somewhat brilliant a couple of years ago. We went in with the Heights of Dargai. We just felt that these stupid hyperactive openers were getting to be run-of-the-mill. Everybody was doing it. And everyone's sort of expressing this, oh, they all sound the same, oh, they all sound the same. They do. Okay, let's give them something really classic. Let's play it well on a well-tuned bagpipe and see what happens. One judge loved it, and one judge hated it. Hated it. He killed us. It's like, oh, great. So much for that supposedly brilliant idea, you know. I just think that we all say, oh, we don't like the roundness, but it gets right down to it. It's no guarantee that it's going to be a success going the other way. So there you go. I don't know. I guess it's a trade-off between energy and style. I mean, our Heights of Dargai doesn't have the energy. It's a Kilworth Hills. It's gorgeous as it is. Don't expect energy, but it brings other things to the table. Musicality is it's such an enriching tune. Gordy.
I took a look at the Worlds program from this year and was heartened to see good success, like in grade 3, of the use of compound time opener along the lines of, you know, Heights of Dargai or Bathgate, Highland Gathering. So thinking about our association here and what it is we're trying to promote with lower grades, and not trying to promote hyperactivity in grade 4 and grade 3 when people can't play.
Yeah.
You know, it's really food for thought and discussion about what we would encourage bands to do.
I think those in the room who are judges who also help other bands, you know, I think that if we practice some of that, what we preach, that would be good, you know. And you know, if you're working with a band and the pipe major would like to start with this thing that goes at, you know, 92 beats per minute, and you don't think that that's going to work, then maybe say, let's try something different. John mentioned about starting round and finishing round. Things that we do and things I like to hear is maybe some of the round stuff doesn't have to be in 2/2, so that when you do go back to that last couple of parts in 2/2, at least there's a contrast in the rhythm, you know, so you've not got 4 parts of a round hornpipe at the start and 8 parts of round reel at the end. You know, if the reel was sprinkled with, you know, some different time signatures in reel, whether it be 3/4 or whatever, that can, and you can do the same in jigs as well. You can kind of waltz it up a little bit and just try and push the envelope a little bit, you know. Like some of those things that we've talked about today, funny enough, like Jack mentioned Archie Begg, and another great field marshal moment would be for what they've done with Donald Cameron Powderhorn. So, the things that seem to stick out enormously in my head about great performances over the last 15 years are things that people have done with old tunes that have been around for quite a while. It's like, wow, you know, some of the other stuff you really can't quite remember what was played, you know. But you know, I always think back to you know, way back in the 70s. I mean, it was very regular to find the top bands finishing their medleys with 3/4 marches. That was because they were just trying to fill the time, basically, you know. But I always think back to like the Shots and Dykehead, when I was a kid, they were my favorite band, although being a Dysart guy, you couldn't say that, you know? So, but I always think that over the years, they came up with great openers, and when they started with Peter Mackenzie Warren, I always remember that tune as perhaps being the greatest tune that I ever thought. Yeah, probably the greatest tune ever played. And I think about the simplicity in that melody, you know, and how you hardly hear tunes like that getting tackled anymore. You know, like, be nice. So it's, when you're judging a contest, I don't know how you folks feel about that, but sometimes when there's been a few bands coming out in a medley contest and they've all kind of started the same way, sometimes a band that comes out and they are playing a little 2/4 march pointed, it's like, wow, I like that. And you know, because it's such a breath of fresh air from what you've heard, you actually might score them more generously than you would have if everybody had come out with a 2/4 march at the start of the medley, just because the change of pace was refreshing to you. You know, sometimes when it's a little slower like that, you get a chance to facilitate what it is you're hearing, as opposed to, you know, 4 parts of hornpipe and there's not an 8th note in sight. That's 16th notes, one after the other. You know, that's a lot. You know, sometimes it can be a little bit sort of melodically overwhelming, you know.
Folks, we're out of time. Thank you for coming. Thanks for participating. It's been a pleasure. Over here. Okay, the 4 I's. The first I, introduction. Comments on the introduction. Just go for it, you guys.
Thought the snares were real strong, but the E's were not as confident. Not like in the previous lock side.
Agreement there? So E's weren't quite, the consistency wasn't quite there as the previous. Good. Did you feel like there was just a wee drop in tempo at the very first couple bars of the march? Yeah?
On that same note, it's the same thing from the 3/4. And I know my band is, any bands I've been in, we've struggled with the same thing. And I think it's a mental thing where you're marching. After the first roll ends, and your next foot comes down, people tend to weigh very heavily on that foot. Almost like you're taking a little breather. And so many bands do it, and they did that there. First roll ends, and then there's a bit of a breath, but that breath is longer than it would be with the actual counted off tempo. The next roll starts, you've already lost a little bit of a tempo.
So a little more.
Got to focus on the
very
break
first.
between the first and second roll.
Anything else relating to the introduction, folks? So, generally speaking, quite good, but some of these little wee things that they could do just a little bit better. I think we appreciate you guys coming, and I hope you feel that you get some constructive type suggestions out of this.
As a judge, you're expecting it to go, and it's going, E, and right away, like, I don't know whether they dropped tempo in the first couple of bars because my foot was hanging up in the air because I wanted an offbeat on the lead-in note, which wasn't there. And it sort of, I know what you're gaining by leaving it out, but you have to realize you are kind of losing something just from my perception. I'm listening for it, and when it doesn't happen, then I'm not quite sure where you are rhythmically.
Yeah. At the same time, would you agree that most bands do leave out these lead-in notes?
Yes.
Because of
it's so hard to get them.
The strength and impact.
Yeah, and it's also so hard to get the lead-in note exactly on the offbeat.
Okay.
Talking grade 2 on up here, is a grade 5 or 4 going to benefit from the rhythmic strength of having a pickup, an 8th note pickup?
My experience in working with these young grade 4 and 5 bands is it's very difficult to get it together with those lead-in notes. The attack's a mess. We tend to take them out at the lower grades so they can all start the tune at the right time. So I think it's a good point of discussion whether grade 2 and up should be playing that. It is part of the tune. I don't know. Intonation. How is the tone? How's the tone of this pipe band? Comments? Okay, just a point of clarification. Good is not good enough for a grade 2 band. For a moving on grade 2 band, they're good, but Field Marshal and company are fantastic. How can they get there? Give them some actual construction.
John Botman?
I felt that going back from the intro, that first E was not quite in tune, and then after you got settled into the tune and got yourselves comfortable, you were blowing much steadier, and the sound was much better then. Then I thought right near the end, I know that like the third and the fifth part of that reel, people want to remember which one they're in, and I think concentration on sound got dropped a little then, because your piping intonation was not as good at that point.
I think you might try alternating between playing the first part of Lock Inside and the first part of the march, because you had a much stronger, more confident sound at that time you played the one part of Lock Inside, and tell the players, look, not only listen, but concentrate on what you're doing physically in that first part of Lock Inside, because that's what your arm and your breathing is supposed to be doing in the first part of the march. And all of a sudden, this is the set, so everybody's just gone up that little wee bit, instead of saying, look, we're perfect in Lock Inside, we can do it there, we can do it anywhere.
I think I would also add, I've played in so many hotel rooms over the years, and everyone's like this, really hot, and way hotter than the room you just came out of. Some sharpness is to be expected, and some deterioration in the sound is to be expected in this situation.
Keying in on an 8th note count to get things started, since the melody is more 8th and 16th oriented, will pull you in tighter to the tempo than starting off with quarter notes to count it off. So even though everything is, the rolls are set for quarter notes, you still, the core, if they're thinking of that, then I don't know how to make that happen as easily for the pipes, but I found that it has tightened up our ability to control the intro tempo.
Okay.
So there's something,
Okay, finish off on intonation. Any more comments? Because Nancy?
There's a really lovely warm drone sound, very warm tone to it, which offset the kind of bright, harder, glassy tone of the chanters really nicely. About halfway through the reel, you could actually hear it dipping and coming up again a little bit.
Yeah.
But all the way up to there, I thought it was quite solid.
I'd add one more comment, just to get to the promised land with Field Marshal and company. There's an alto about the sound, and maybe not quite enough depth and bass. Okay, so so just a little bit. I mean,
I agree.
just to be splitting the hairs a bit.
Yeah.
Slightly more prominent bass drone sound, and if we had a little time out, sort of just a bass drum, just perfect. I did wander down there, and I got to say I couldn't hear the tenors because of the room and everything, so I had no comment there. But there's a little bit of possible opportunity in the power department.
I agree. I have dreams about getting good bass drone reeds. They haven't come true yet.
Crank them open, then.
But we're working on it. That's something we take to heart
Yeah,
very
okay.
much.
Just a little weak point on that in our band, and we look at a bass drum like that and say there's opportunity for improvement right there because it's tuning too high.
Yeah.
The basses are not prominent enough.
Yep.
But, you know, for us, the old wives' tale about the bottom of the bass tuning high could not be farther from the truth. You want that bass 1 inch from the ivory,
Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
That high, that low
Yep.
for bass power.
Yep.
So we definitely get our guys to try for that. Integration.
Ask one more question on intonation. Should the chanters be higher pitched?
Are you asking me? I don't think so. I think there's I hesitate to use this word, but there's a shrillness about them. Just, Nancy touched on it, just a little edge to them. You can, in other words, broadening the sound at that pitch would be just a slight improvement. And to try to strive for more pitch without broadening the sound, I think would go down the wrong path. So we hesitate to drive pitch and lose the breadth. So more basses, maybe a little more licking on the reed, broaden the sound. Integration, folks, let's keep moving. How did they play?
I think to me there was two big issues that go hand in hand. One is I thought for grade 2 everything should be a little quicker, and I think that part of why it's being held back. I think the snare core is a little focused on the downbeat accents. I heard a lot of heavy downbeat accents, whereas the other strokes were a lot lower. So it kind of made the march, especially when we feel a little laborious. You know, it's just kind of done that downbeat. I just kept hearing whack and then quiet, then whack and then quiet. So I think they go hand in hand. I think a little less power on the downstroke from the snare core and a faster tempo. The snare core wouldn't have time to get this high up for that downbeat. So I just felt it was a little slow and a little labored.
You guys agree with that? The tempos? Yeah? I felt so, just a little bit sluggish the whole way.
Of the 8 opportunities that you had to play the 8th bar correct, I think that it was probably only played well twice out of the 8 times. It was, I thought that the downbeat on the 8th bar, Hari Hari Hammadikada, was not always loud enough, and also slightly ahead of the pipers. So there wasn't that really simple part of the tune is Hey Ambram was probably the part of the tune that as a group was played poorly most of the time. You know, and sometimes that could come because you're thinking too much about what's coming next. You think, okay, I'm into the end phrase, Hari, Hari, okay, and because you take that little bit of time to think about slightly too far ahead, you then miss the little bit that you're still in, that little bit, and it's the easiest part probably of I know from a drumming standpoint, it's the easiest part of that drum score, and you know, something tells me that's probably the easiest part of the pipe melody as well, is that Hari Hari Harikadi Ambra, yet it was not lined up well at all.
Marty.
Again, this is in the context of the room, but I felt particularly in the reel, the weight of accents were so binary that it actually, it seemed to create a degree of conflict with the pipe section. We were sitting listening to it. I mean, it seemed to me like the accents were on or off, unlike with the march and Strathspey. And then you started, it didn't seem to drive the melody or, you know, accompany the melody any longer. It seemed to be, it was, I'm on, I'm off, I'm on, I'm off. And again, some of that, you know, there wasn't that, I didn't see that color or that, you know, the slider kind of value that you were getting in the march and in the Strathspey.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the first and third phrases of each part of the march, they always end on an eighth note. And the pipers weren't really holding the eighth notes to finish the phrase. But the drum corps was, and so they'd be coming down hard, and then the pipers were almost off into the next phrase with whatever rudiment started the next phrase a little ahead of the beat. And in the third part of the reel, the big burl, they were holding it, the drum corps, but the pipers were right off.
Good point. Interpretation.
I really liked the break from the Strathspey to the reel. It was like,
It was a big extension.
and then they went for it. It was like, it was almost at the point of being too late, and then you just laid it right in there. I really liked that. I like that sort of creating that little bit of drama, like have they forgot where they're going, and then, no, they were right there. That was, for me, the highlight of the entire performance.
I also felt, Baba Feta Karen, you slowed down after you initially started the Strathspey. And I really felt you pulling everybody back. And then I didn't like the break into the reel. I thought it was a tentative break. I wanted something bigger, but I thought your tackums were ahead of the drums. I was trying to listen, like you said, you know, they all hitting down together, and I felt you were ahead there.
So, in
Am I
summary, would you agree a good, strong band, a nice performance, and we're nitpicking a little bit to find these little things, but pretty good, you guys. How about we get on with the medley? How's the initial tempo? Little drop maybe? Yeah?
I think there was some drive from the back end, and the drive wasn't being picked up in the front end whatsoever.
On the introduction, as well, it's the carpet's a little more helpful than grass would be, but Donald was marking time, and the entire side section was marking time, but there was barely 2 people in the side section marking the same time as the lead drummer. I thought that was interesting, and I couldn't really, it's not something, I picked up on that because if everybody was marking time at the same time, all you would hear is tap, tap, but all I could hear was trap, trap, trap. So their foots are all going down at the same time, which means they've all got a slightly interpretation of what's going on at the start. I thought it was interesting. That wasn't something I heard that before they even started, so I was expecting the introduction to be a little, because not everybody's on the same page.
I found at the beginning, the first part of your hornpipe, I don't think the sides were giving you enough downbeat. I don't think they were directing you enough. I think, you know, that, and I think that's the problem that you were, and because of that, the pipe corps, just what Coffey was saying, the pipe corps didn't sound like they were playing together.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that whole medley was a little faster last night.
Probably was that.
I just found there was much more excitement last night, like you were out there to entertain people. Here you're out there being cautious with judges. I mean, there's a real sort of different mindset in what you're doing.
Partying a little bit last night, back end there.
Well,
let's go on to intonation. Is there anything more we can add that we haven't already addressed in the opening bits? How was the tone? Anything new?
It was a,
Yes?
This time, because in the medley, the tenors actually had more voice than they had in the MSR, it was more obvious that there's a flatness coming from here. They're not tuned as brightly as they could be. They're not complementing the bass drum. I think switching their position where they're currently standing and bringing their pitch up a little bit would improve the overall sound.
actually the same thing. There's one tenor that's, I think it's, usually it's the bottom head that's a little flat because the note drops as it resonates. So you could hear that a lot when the tenor, they were played very nice and the bass sounds great, but it's just you could hear that the tenor flattening out on when it would allow it to resonate.
Good hear you guys. On to integration. How they play.
Clarity of fingering is much better in the medley than it was in the Strasbourg reel in the MSR, and that's because of confidence. And we're losing the tradition of MSR playing, and bands tend to focus more on medley playing. Now the Strasbourgs and reels that they played, the clarity of fingering was good, but in Boba Fitter Cairn and Loch Carron, I'm going back to that, it was muddy. Fair comment?
No, I agree, Alistair. We have had the habit of changing a lot of MSRs every year, like phasing tunes out, and then we decided we're going to keep them for a good while now and just really get to live with these for a while. And I agree with your comment. We've been doing a lot of work to try to strengthen the execution.
With more confidence
Oh,
in
yeah.
medley, because that's
We've been
what,
playing it longer, Alistair.
but that's what the guys like to play.
Right.
Anything in the interpretation, the musicality, all that found out?
I didn't like the hornpipe.
Did not like it?
I thought the drummers were pulsing it better than the pipers. I felt it very square and not the two. We're supposed to be listening like to two sections together. So I was trying to listen to the drums, and I felt I was hearing them putting more pulse phrase in there, and you guys were playing it much squarer than it didn't match up.
Something positive. I like the key changes between the slow air and the two Strasbourgs. That was nice.
Thank you,
I like to know Easter Spay as a Strasbourg and as the real.
Oh.
Did you do that? Did you do that yourself as the real?
Adrian Melvin helped us on the reel, and I think Andrew Douglas had a little part in it.
That's
There were
nice.
a few guys.
That's nice. I like that.
Thank you very much.
It's a nice technique to come back to it later on in a different format. That brings a lot of unity to a medley.
I felt that there was some pretty strong unison issues that came in the melody when you were playing the harmonies in the jig.
Yeah.
In other words, the unisons were actually quite good. All of a sudden, you started playing the harmonies, and the unisons were not very good in the primary melody during the time the unisons were going on.
I thought the hornpipe was just a really nice arrangement with the little twists with all the low G's and that, and the grips, and the drums were doing good work there too. But there's a lot of round stuff. 4 parts of round in the beginning. Who knows how many parts of round at the end? The year before, when you played the Argyle Farewell to Bosancourt, that was cool because it was so trad, and maybe it broke up all the round stuff at the end. So maybe less round, either front or back, but it's nice music.
Right to that same point, maybe a little more midsection sculpting of stuff to present the finale a little bit more on a silver platter, because it's sort of like, oh, that was the ending. It just came up a little abrupt as opposed to a little more of a presentation. So if you are going to be logging miles and miles of round road, maybe find that, just shape that ending a little better.
I think you talked about the kind of modern bridges people are using, and I think there was a couple of those where you kind of changed, tempo in one of the tunes to go into the next tune. And I think they were good, but it took me a second. In other words, I don't think they were delineated enough. I couldn't really, I guess that's the idea, but I think you have to do something so it's a little bit clearer, it stands out. I wasn't ready for it. It took me a few seconds before I figured it out, and maybe that's the idea, but I just felt it was a little fuzzy and there was a little mix-up in tempo, and I didn't feel like it was polished off, that bridge. I felt like the band kind of went into it, like, oh, here, now we changed it and it swooped in instead of just, bam, you've changed.
Maybe what would have helped there, Donald, I was thinking that too, is it's extra smooth there, the way you cleverly go from pointer stress bass to Takami stress bass and the round reel, whatever. A little pause to set up one of those little moments. So it's clearly changing. It's extra slick there,
Good, that's good point.
Did you feel that the drums in the stress bass were doing 4 pulse bars and the pipers were doing 2 pulse bars? It felt, in the first stress bass, I had an inkling of it. And then by the second one, I definitely didn't hear a strong, all 4 pulses of the stress bass per bar. I felt it, and then it did evolve into 2 pulse bar, and that's what gave me the hint that that's what I was listening to that was bothering me. My dancing side, of course. Couldn't dance to it.
Time for one more point, someone? Nancy?
I thought the pipers were actually doing a lot of really nice subtle stuff in the stress bass, but I thought the drums' predominance on the first downbeat all the way through that hid some of that. It was kind of the opposite of what you were saying about the hornpipe, Leslie, where it was sort of the other way around. At that point, I thought the piping was really gorgeous and really nicely pulsed, but it was a little hard to make out the fine little details of it with that really crashing first downbeat. Again, it could be the room, too.
One last one.
Thank you.
I
really thought they played very well indeed. They were very good. One of the things that really stuck out was the break into the second jig. The drummers shut up. No, but it was really nice though. It was well done. The break into that second jig was very nice. Sitting here, it's very hard to really hear the whole thing because the drums are really coming through very, very strong. But the one weakness I noticed was in the very last part of the last reel, the drummers and the pipers were not even close. They were way up, just different from each other. But on the whole, good job. Good job.
How about a big hand for these people here?
Ready? Right. Quick. Back.
John. Excellent. How about we get you to turn around and face the audience, if you don't mind. Nice, great job, you guys. Okay, what we want to do is point out a couple of things that they did well in each section, and let's give them one or two things that they can take away and work on. Okay? So let's start with the introduction. How was the intro?
I thought it was really good. I thought
Yeah.
you would bang where it belonged and it was in tune. I liked it.
You know what? I thought so too, but when you go to that quick C, do-da-dum-ba-dum, on the offbeat, that's very hard to do. And that's very hard for young people to do, because there's a lot of things happening at one time, and they nailed that C perfectly. Right on the money. Excellent.
Both with the 3/4 set and the competition set, it seemed like the 3 paces rolls got a little rubbery towards the end of each roll, tough fitting in exactly at the tempo maybe that the pipe major called. So you gotta make sure you don't start slowing your tempo down right on the first roll. So you gotta get that last stroke in right in time.
Good. Anything else in the intro? Pretty good though, guys, eh? Pretty darn good. Okay,
I noticed that the snare drummers were standing flat-footed when the pipe major was marching, and it might be a good idea if they tried to move their feet too to get the tempo to eliminate what John was saying about not quite getting the tempo.
good. Good point.
But
Good
that
point.
might help a little bit.
The intonation, the tone. How was the tone of the band?
I thought it was a very pleasing sound with a couple of notes that were, off, but the timbre was really nice. The drone started out good, and then maybe a drone slipped, and then there was a spot in one of the breaks where somebody lost their blowing, and the drones went in and they went out. But it was, for the most part, well blown.
Any other comments? I would say that is very strong tone for a kid's band, and we have our kids' bands. That is good. Maybe the next step for these kids is that stronger blowing, so they can maintain that tone. Started up good, and it had just a few little moments. What we tell our guys back home is, just for that 3 minutes, concentrate. Concentrate. Don't think about these lunch, hockey, whatever you're thinking about. Just 3 minutes, and blow hard. And then after we're done, let your minds wander all over the place, But that's
important that when they reach a rough spot where maybe you forget the tune for a second, you've got to keep your drones up.
Yeah.
So even if you cut your chanter out, you can't let your drones go down. That's the problem.
Marty.
One thing, Jack, about that band focus, and actually that was one of the things that I noticed is visually they were all seemed to be locked in and paying attention.
To the pipe major?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
which
good
is
point.
which is difficult for some adult bands. People's eyes will wander, and they were locked
Good job,
in.
guys. Yeah. Good job. Okay, the integration, the playing. How was that? Scott?
I really enjoyed especially you hear so often in the march contests, the bass drummer will just keep the beat from start to finish, and she did a great job of actually changing what she was playing for each tune, and really helping the melody and pull it out. It really stood out to me the whole way, and I think it kept the band feeling very musical.
Mm-hmm. Good bass drumming, definitely.
Yeah, very good.
I think the pipers played with lovely, strong accenting. They were fabulous, and very clearly together on the downbeats of beginnings of bars and so on. I thought that was very well done.
Would you agree that they're being well taught? They're pointing their tunes. They're not rounding and swimming their way through. There's definition. Do, dee, dun, dun, da, dun, 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 that I'm not afraid to cut. I like that.
I would just say, because you said that maybe the next step is to go to a little bit stronger reeds. One thing that I was seeing in a couple of you is drones going up and down. Like as you're taking breaths, you're going, and when you get a stronger reed, that tendency will get worse. So I think you need to look in the mirror and make sure when you're breathing out and not with your shoulders. And that will help you as you go to a stronger reed.
That is a very good point. When we're teaching our kids, we look at this, top of the bass drone. Is the top of the bass drone moving? The answer is yes, we all move, but we want it to move as little as possible. So we actually do the mirror thing, and we look at that top of the bass drone. Don't let it move. Just focus on that. So, good observation. How about anything else in the musical?
You just listen to the drummers, because very often you were just a little behind the drummers in the pickup notes. So just,
Pipers don't like listening to drummers.
no, I know that, I know, I say, but.
You know what? I thought they started
That's
off
very small too. I mean, that was
great
pretty
and maybe
minor.
got a little bit tired towards the end. Anybody else feel that way? And I think that's just because this is the time of year where, you know, it's the fall. We've all had a big break, and they're just probably just freshly getting back at it. Is that right, Marie? Yeah. So they're not going to be in championship shape, but it's pretty strong. You know, just sort of, as I said, suck it up and go hard for 3 minutes, and then you're done. You know.
Jack, the one thing I thought that was strong as a whole was that they played tunes all on the same time signature, but they kept you interested because the way that the tunes moved, they were kind of, there was a flow to them, you know?
Yeah.
And it was nice. And I guess it's sometimes easier to pick them all in the same time signature with a different flavor than try to change time signatures and create the flavor as well. I thought that's nice. And all really nice tunes that seem to be, obviously, I don't think that the kids had anything to do with the selection of the tunes, so they're being well guided in picking tunes that they can play within their grasp. And so that was really good. That really, because they can get their hands and heads around that stuff, pipes and drums, and they give themselves a chance to play well, which they did by that. So obviously, whoever picked the tunes has done a good job, and the kids are responding well to playing stuff that's within their grasp and still give them a bit of challenge. That's good.
Is there anything more we can send these kids away with? Did we give them enough little tips?
Big applause, maybe.
Yes. Very good, guys. Brandon.